Good evening, everyone. We are doing a do-over. Some of you may not know that we're doing a do-over, but if you are out there and you're on the Hey Sister page, can you see us? Can you hear us? Please let us know because we were having technological challenges and we wanted to start over because this topic is way too important for us not to have the best broadcast. So I'm looking at it on my iPad screen. I see all of our faces on the screen. Woo! Yay! Okay, so we got that part fixed. I'm gonna put this in information in the comment about National Human Trafficking line. Let me send this link over to my friend here so that she can share it on her page. And we're doing a reboot live and in living color. Let me just tell you all that. That's what we have to do sometimes, right? So welcome everybody to tonight's episode of Hey Sister. If you were with us before, thank you for hanging in there as we work through our technological challenges. And we got way far in. We tried to ride with it. You know, sometimes this is a lesson in life, right? Sometimes you hang in and you really try to make it work. And then you like, you know what? We can do so much better than this. So we're going to have to do a do-over. So that's what we decided to do. We decided to hit the reset button and bring us back. So we're starting off right from the top. I'm Demetria Sloan. I'm joined by my sister, Christina. Hey, sister, how you doing?
Hey,
Yes. This has been an interesting learning experience for us, hasn't it?
it has. It has.
And although we spent 45 minutes doing tech check before we started, guess what? Technology still played a role tonight. We are so excited to be joined by Ms. Valencia Poitier. She is the staff counsel for American Integrity Insurance Company. She is a former prosecutor here in the Orange County, Florida area, and she has prosecuted cases. And so we wanted to have her on to talk about this very important topic of trafficking. Now, we started off the last time and we're going to bring it to you again. It is near and dear to all of our hearts, aka HBCU Impact Day. So all three of us, women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, we want you to join us on tomorrow, September 16th, for our aka 1 million in one day HBCU Impact Day initiative. Now, what we need you to do is go to donate.akaeaf.org, and I'm going to type it down here in the comments so that you can see. And first, I'm going to put it up on the screen. So you can see, go to donate.akaeaf.org and help us reach $1 million in one day to support our HBCUs. HBCUs are responsible for what we know as the Black middle class. They're responsible for the majority of Black doctors, Black lawyers, Black engineers that you know in this country. And there was a time when HBCUs were the only institutions to serve those of people of color. Not saying that that was the only people they served, because that's a misnomer and a trope that's out there, but they were the only institutions that serves people of color. And we want to protect the legacy and the history of HBCUs. And if you're thinking of, well, who do I know that went to a HBCU? Just the most famous woman in the world, Oprah. How about that? Tennessee State University alum. So, sister, why is this day important to you?
Well, first of all, if you're thinking about who went to an HBCU, I would say it's your favorite sisters, Demetria and Christina, who both went to HBCUs. But Oprah is obviously pretty important too. Now, it's so important because again, all three of us are women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, very proud members, and our organization was founded at an HBCU at Howard University in 1908, and so that is one of many reasons. Obviously, both of us are graduates. I'm a proud graduate of Southern University, the Southern University A&M College in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I have a degree in engineering from Southern University. And many of this country's engineers are also graduates of HBCUs. So it's important, especially as we look at the Future Act that is under attack and could possibly not be funded here for STEM education at HBCUs, at tribal colleges, as Hispanic serving universities, and other minority serving universities. So in addition to making your donation to AKA's Educational Advancement Fund, we ask you to go to uncf.org/protect our future. Protecting our future, so that you can learn more about the Future Act and learn more about protecting the future of STEM education at minority serving institutions, particularly HBCUs. So
yes. And so we want you to go to donate.akaeaf.org. We also want you to go to what she just talked about with UNCF and protecting our future. We'll drop that one in the comments as well. You can text to give. You can text AKA HBCU to 44321. Let me type that in here. And Valencia, what we ask you to do is tell us why this initiative is important to you.
Yes, absolutely. I did not attend an HBCU, but I am the product of individuals who attended an HBCU. My mother attended Florida A&M University, and my father attended Bethune-Cookman College, or I guess it's now Bethune-Cookman University. So I am definitely a product of two HBCU parents, and they excelled quite well in their career. So I do support both schools, and I support HBCUs in general.
Awesome. And you currently are an ad hoc professor where?
I'm an adjunct professor at
Florida
Florida
not ad hoc. Girl, my language right, girl.
At Florida A&M College of Law, I am an adjunct professor there. So, of course, I do support my HBCUs.
Fantastic. So we really wanted to get that out. And so we're, like I said, we're remixing this thing like we didn't even start at 8 o'clock. We starting over again. Huh? We've had some of this conversation, but we're going to have it again. And we want to have it again because we needed this broadcast to be captured perfectly because this topic is so important. And so tonight we want to talk about trafficking. We don't have the normal fun levity conversation that we have with our hot topics. We wanted to talk about giving to HBCUs because you're going to be training up the next group of attorneys who are going to be tackling this topic. So Valencia, we would like you to tell the folks a little bit about who you are and how you came to this work.
Yes, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Florida. I did my master's degree at Nova Southeastern, and I went to law school at Barry University College of Law. And I started my career as a lawyer, obviously here in Florida. And I started off as an assistant public defender, serving in that capacity for a little more than 4 years. After that, I became an assistant state attorney, a prosecutor here in the Ninth Circuit, where I prosecuted felony offenses that included violent crimes, drug crimes, child abuse, and sex crimes, just to name a few. And I spent the last year of my career at the state attorney's office assigned to the special victims unit, where I began prosecuting, where some of the cases that I prosecuted were human trafficking cases. So this became a very, very, very important topic for me as I learned more about it while prosecuting those cases. Most notably, I became one of a few prosecutors in the circuit to take a human trafficking case to a jury trial and receive a guilty verdict on all counts, for which the defendant is now serving a life sentence in the Florida Department of Corrections. I'm licensed to practice here in the state of Florida, as well as in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, giving us your background and telling us why you have experience and knowledge in this subject matter area, because we know that it's a topic that sometimes we really get confused. So because it's like we're not really sure. And so what we would like you to do is start us off with what is trafficking? Like, can you define it for us?
Yeah, when I look at trafficking, I look at two definitions before I turn to what the law is on trafficking, what the Florida statute says about it. And I look at both dictionary.com as well as the National Institute of Justice. Dictionary.com defines trafficking as the action or practice of illegally transporting people from one area to another, typically for the purpose of forced labor or sexual exploitation. And the National Institute of Justice defines it as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by improper means, such as force, abduction, fraud, or coercion, for an improper purpose, including forced labor or sexual exploitation. So in both of those definitions, we have both the forced labor and the sexual exploitation, giving us that differentiation in understanding that human trafficking is not just about sex trafficking, it's also about the labor aspect as well.
Wow, that's important. And, I was telling Christina earlier about how my father shared with me how our grandfather actually ended up in a forced labor situation many years ago, obviously, because he's been deceased now for many years. But he was someone who, after his wife died, looking for work, still having some children at home to support, and they went out to the respective family members, those who were still at home, right? And so coming for work, and ended up basically in indentured servitude here in Plant City, Florida. And I know that one of the largest trafficking cases was just right up the road from us in Marion County, Florida. And so where, working in, strawberry fields, orange groves, and it's basically, you live on the land, so you pay to live there. That comes out of your wages, and then you buy their food, you buy their the support. And so it's like, oh yes, you'll be able to make this money, send this money back home, but then that never really materializes. And that's what he experienced.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because human trafficking is referred to often as modern day slavery. Stealing freedom for profit. And it sounds like that's along the same lines of what he may have gone through. And again, the victims are used for both commercial sex and or labor purposes, and they're often induced by these traffickers because they're sold this great story of how they can make a better earning or a better living to support their families. And then that's when the force starts and the coercion.
Wow. All right. Well, sister, do you have a question around that definition?
No, like I said earlier, I appreciate the definition, understanding that it's the forced labor aspect as well as the sexual exploitation aspect of it. I think we got into a conversation where you were saying, Demetria, what should your children going to school, what should they look for if someone is a victim of potential trafficking? And then from that, I also wanted to understand how are they groomed and those kind of characteristics that make a certain particular person, I guess, right for a trafficker to target. So
let's start with the signs first. If you could just tell us, what are some of the signs that we should look for in trafficking, whether it's children or even adults potentially who we could come into contact with just going out to the grocery store, right? What are some of the signs we should look for?
Okay, we can talk about the signs, and then I guess go back to what you were saying about the how, the when, and all of that good stuff. So when we're talking about meeting a victim of human trafficking, we have to understand that there's a lot of fear, a lot of distrust. They're scared to talk to anyone. They don't want to talk to you 9 times out of 10. Or if they do want to talk to you, they're so scared to do it that they can't make themselves do it. They're also unaware of what is being done to them, that it's a crime. Because they've been brainwashed by the time you probably run into them. And they don't consider themselves victims all the time because they don't blame themselves for their situation. They also develop a loyalty and positive feelings, if you will, toward the the human trafficker, as I like to call them, the smooth operator, and they may try to talk to you in a way that will protect that person who is doing these acts toward them. And sometimes they don't even know where they are because they've been moved around from place to place so much to protect the smooth operator. So there's a fear for safety, a fear for their family, a fear for their friends. But when you start talking to them, or you think you've come into contact with a victim of human trafficking, look at whether or not that person is accompanied by another person who seems to be controlling. Does the person accompanying the victim insist on giving the information to you themselves instead of letting that person talk to you on his or her own? Do you detect any physical abuse? Does the victim seem submissive or fearful? Does the victim have difficulty communicating because of language or cultural barriers? And I want to stop there for a second and be clear that victims of human trafficking aren't always from another country. Sometimes they're in our own backyard. So there could be a language barrier or a cultural barrier, or there very well may not be. Also, does the victim have identification on them? Because a lot of times the smooth operator, or the trafficker, if you will take their ID from them. Because remember, it's all about control. So they may not have anything on them, not even a key to wherever they're living, whether it's a hotel room, apartment, or house. They may not have any identification on them. They may have been given, or told rather, to use a different name when they speak to people. So there's so many different factors to look for.
Wow, that's very interesting, and especially around that identification piece. So I was recently and attended a workshop on this topic, and what struck me was when I went to that presentation, it reminded me of like a week prior to, where I was at a restaurant and there were kids with those, oh, I go to this, I'm doing this for this program to raise money. And these kids were unaccompanied. There was no adult around. It was just a group of kids. And when I went to the presentation on trafficking, it's like, well, when you see them and, they're unaccompanied and they're trying to get people to donate, and it's like, oh, you can cash app it, or you can do this. It's like sometimes those kids are in trafficking type of situations where they're being exploited to actually raise funds. And it was a group of young men. And I think sometimes we don't think that young men can be exploited or trafficked, and they can. And so when I thought back to, wow, I was there, I saw this, and I didn't think anything, it didn't dawn on me that, because, hey, I was the kid who was the Girl Scout who went knock on doors and asked for money. And then we see these kids with these little glossies. But again,
Demetria, we don't hear you.
You don't hear me?
I hear you.
She hears me.
Oh, I don't hear it anymore.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. So it was just like, yeah, but then when you start probing, so there was really like no other identifying thing. They didn't have any school IDs with them. It was like there's all these little bitty things that were missing, and I missed it. And so now it's like I kick myself. Nothing I can do about it now, but just hope that in the future that I don't miss it the next time around.
Right.
So, well, she was talking about, so after we know what signs to look for, what are some of the actions we can take? Because I missed it. And so what are some of the actions that I could have taken in that moment if I even recognized that was the situation?
Well, first, you want to always keep your safety at the forefront of any actions that you take. Because remember, the smooth operators, or the traffickers, as we call them, they are typically violent individuals. You don't want anyone to hurt you for talking to their victim, right? So when you meet someone whom you think is a victim of human trafficking, you want to try to isolate the possible victim from the person accompanying them without raising suspicion. You don't want to raise suspicion at all that you have any type of gut feeling that they're a victim of human trafficking. Okay. You can maybe say something like, it's your policy to speak with a person alone, or something like that. You also want to enlist a trusted translator or interpreter if necessary. Confidentiality is paramount when speaking with victims. So if you're going to talk to a person to try to ascertain if they're a victim of human trafficking, limit the number of people you have with you when you speak to the possible victim, and be sensitive. Be sensitive, but also be indirect when probing to ascertain whether or not he or she is a victim of human trafficking. Because remember, victims will deny and they will protect. They're smooth operators. So you want to be very sensitive to what they're dealing with, but you also want to be indirect when you're probing. And again, your security, your safety is paramount as well.
So one of the questions that came in on my watch party is, what about the children that are kidnapped by a trafficker or recruited by other kids that are in a trafficking situation?
What is the question specifically? What about them?
I don't know if they're asking is specific or I guess because I'm a parent, like how do you help your kids understand if they're being recruited to be in some type of trafficking situation?
You have a conversation with them. And I think that's where a lot of the times we drop the ball, because we keep this discussion about human trafficking amongst adults. We don't talk to children about it. It's important that once they become of a mature enough age, and I would say gauge your child. You should know your child well enough to know what age, they would be able to comprehend or understand what you're saying. But sit down and have a conversation with your kid. It's okay to pull your child away from that PlayStation or away from that video game for 10 minutes to have this conversation about human trafficking. Let them know that it's real. A lot of the times when I do speaking engagements on human trafficking, adults always ask the same question: how do I have the conversation with my child? Which lets me know a lot of adults are not having this conversation with their children, which is scary. It's very scary, because our children can go to school, like you just said, and they can be recruited by other children who are victims of human trafficking and don't realize it. Or better yet, they can go out into the public when we send them to different events. We send them to the movies, send them to football games, basketball games, and there could be a smooth operator or a human trafficker there that can try to recruit them. We have to talk to our children. I have the conversation with my nephews. Don't be scared to come and tell us if something's going wrong or if there's something that feels off to you and you want to talk to us about. Do not hesitate to pick up the phone. But parents have to be willing to sit down, have that conversation with their children, go online, pull resources, call people who are knowledgeable on the subject. If you want us to help you talk to your children, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to do so. But you know your child's level of maturity. You know what your child can handle. Sit down and have the conversation with your child that this is real. Someone may try to coerce you to work for them. Someone may try to kidnap you and make you go to work for them. Have that conversation. And if, like I said, if you're scared to have it, call someone who can have it with you.
Yeah, another question came in. I think it was a clarification. How do you know if you're in this situation? Like, how do you know if you're even it takes a level of awareness. So I think about the young girls who are blinded by the limelight, right? Who are, oh, you can be a model. Oh, you're so beautiful, right? And then and have been sold all these promises and aren't even aware that they are being, they're being, they're being targeted to be picked off, right?
Right. A lot of the time, and that's how it starts with adults. You're reeled in because you're offered this false hope, this dream that never matriculates. It turns into a nightmare. For instance, and I gave this example earlier of the young lady a victim that I became aware about when I was working as a prosecutor, who literally met the trafficker at a club, a bar in Miami on South Beach. And he promised her that she could come work for him, make more money than she was making at the current time. She would have more money to take care of herself, her family. He fed a dream to her. And he offered her a job as a club promoter. And he had no intention ever of working her as a club promoter, employing her as a club promoter. Instead, he instilled fear into her and put her on the street to work for him as a prostitute. But again, she was fed that dream of, if you come with me, you'll have a better lifestyle than what you have now. It's sort of like when we go look for a new job, we obviously want a job in whatever capacity, as a lawyer, a doctor, a human resources officer, we want a job that is going to pay more than what we are currently making. We want a job that is going to give us better benefits so that we can better take care of our families. And that's the same dream that's fed to them, except the trafficker or the smooth operator, if you will, they know from the very beginning, they have no intention of putting that person to work with whatever dream that they put in, that they give them. What they really plan to do is instill fear in them and put them out to work on the streets or work somewhere else in whatever capacity and take all the money for themselves. And you know, it very couldn't well be a case of putting her to work as a club promoter. But if he were to do that as a trafficker, he would take all of her money from her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
She would have that fear that if she leaves, there would be bodily harm to her and or her family and or friends.
Mm-hmm. Sister, what questions do you have?
So one of the things that we talked about, and you mentioned that you don't necessarily have statistics on it, but it was about the Super Bowl. I've always heard that Super Bowl is the largest sex trafficking event of the year. Obviously, there are a lot of strippers who are, exotic dancers who are flown in from different places to participate in the Super Bowl. Obviously, we heard about what happened with New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft there in Florida, going to a spa or what have you. And so, and then even was it Warren Sapp a few years ago?
Warren Sapp. Mm-hmm.
In Houston, where there was a similar situation. So we live in a society with social media that we have a lot of young ladies who are quote unquote models, and they are showing everything or in trying to have that glamorous life. We have a lot of rap artists who have come out of the strip club culture and who are saying, you know, I had to do these things, but look at how great my life is now. How is that strip club culture, that Instagram model, how is that contributing to sex trafficking and you know, making these having people fall into situations where it's seeming like they don't know that they're falling into these situations, like the Robert Kraft situation?
Okay, 2 caveats. That's a good question. 2 caveats. First, we don't want to confuse prostitution always with human trafficking, because there are instances where someone could be a prostitute but not necessarily be involved with human trafficking. Those are 2 different situations. So we don't want to confuse the 2. And just because a person is arrested for prostitution or soliciting a prostitute does not mean that that person has anything to do with human trafficking. So we don't want to confuse the audience or even put a label on someone that may have been suspected of soliciting a prostitute as a human trafficker. We don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. Second is, everyone who works in a strip club or who is a part of the exotic dancing life, they are not always involved in human trafficking as well. So we don't want to deter people by saying, you know, just because she's an exotic dancer, she's involved in human trafficking. That's not what we're saying at all. So I want to make sure the audience is clear on that. But as it relates to the exotic dancing lifestyle, let's also be clear in saying that typically club owners are not aware of a lot of the things that their patrons are involved in. Just because human trafficking might initiate at a club or a certain establishment does not mean that the owner knows anything about it. Okay, so the clubs are not there for human trafficking purposes. And we need to be clear about that, because we don't want there to be suspicions that club owners are involved in human trafficking, because that's not what we're saying at all. But what we are saying is that sometimes our smooth operators, or human traffickers, as we want to call them, can walk into a club and they can prey on exotic dancers or young ladies working at the clubs, or young men dancing at the clubs as well. They can go in there and see them as potential prey or victims for human trafficking. So I don't have any statistics as it relates to the Super Bowl. I've heard that, but I've never looked into it. But I will say that it would not surprise me if that were true, because of a a lot of partying that goes on Super Bowl weekend. But going back to the club lifestyle or the exotic dancing lifestyle, yes, it's probably very plausible to suspect that the smooth operators or the human traffickers will go into exotic dancing establishments and try to pick up on the dancers and see them as prey rather, and they become victims of that lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about another type of lifestyle, and that's the nannies. So, the television show American Crime Story, their last season, they kind of touched on this. And right, there was a scenario where, okay, I'm bringing in this au pair, or I'm hiring you to be this nanny from another country, and that person came into the home, and it was great. It was so lovely. And I get to speak French to the children, and I'm helping them learn this second language. And then it was like, well, let's take your passport and let's put it in our safe for safekeeping. So you don't have to worry about if this gets lost or anything. She had a reaction. She didn't listen to that little voice that speaks to us. And then, of course, things started going downhill from there and became a physical abuse situation, and on and on and on. But what my sister, we were talking about this as we were prepping for the show. You see out, if you go to a park, if you're a parent, you have young children, you see women with young children. And I'm not saying they're all, being trafficked, but it never dawned on me that, oh, wow, that there are people who are live-in nannies or au pairs and housekeepers who are young women who are looking to come to America and save enough money to send back home or start their education in this country, and they are actually in a trafficking situation.
Quite possibly. I think we have to be very careful as to not generalize every situation that we hear about or see about. When it relates to children who are, selling the wrapping paper or selling the Krispy Kreme donuts, or even the nannies that are brought over from a different country, we have to be very careful and not generalize, even with the exotic dancers. Human trafficking happens when the smooth operator or the trafficker, if you will, preys upon the vulnerable victim. So again, it goes back to talking a good game and selling that dream to them. But then all of a sudden you have those elements of fraud, force, coercion, and it happens because they want to make money by using the victim to their advantage. So just because someone brings a nanny over here and they take their passport, is that enough for human trafficking? Probably not. We have to look at different elements under the laws of that state that we're talking about. We also look at the fact that, some people say human trafficking only happens a certain time of the day. No, it's not true. It happens any time of day or night. It can happen in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. It can happen at midnight. It does not matter. There's no time that's inconvenient for these smooth operators. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of saying, okay, look, we have this issue of human trafficking out here. It is a huge issue right now in the media. We know that, it's happening. It's occurring right in our own backyards a lot of the time. But we can't generalize it and say just because her passport was taken, this is human trafficking. We've got to look at the law of our state. We've got to look for that force. We've got to look for that fraud. We've got to look for that coercion, because without that, we can get somebody in some serious danger just by generalizing. And we definitely don't want to do that either.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely don't want to do that. But I think the point I'm just trying to get at is like these subtle things that we just never connect the dots to. And I think that's why it can, the problem is really, it's just grown up, right? It's because it's happening right under our eyes and we're under our faces, and we don't even know, because it's so insidious and subtle, and it's quiet. It's often very quiet.
It's very quiet because a lot of the time we don't want to talk about rape. right? We don't want to talk about the violence that's happening behind closed doors. We want to put on makeup and try to hide it when we walk outside. But when we're looking at human trafficking, we're looking at that force. We're looking for that rape. We're looking for beatings. We're looking for constraint. We're looking for confinement. And I'm not saying we have to have all of those, but we're looking for one or the other. We're also looking at the fraud. We're looking for the false offers, the deceptive offers of employment, offers of marriage even. Come with human trafficking, offers for a better lifestyle in particular. We're looking at those threats of serious harm, that physical restraint. We're looking at schemes, plans, patterns as it relates to causing victims to believe that if you don't do what I want you to do, that there will be some type of consequence that will hurt you or your family members or even your close friends if the trafficker knows who they are. We're also looking at abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process, because sometimes these smooth operators or traffickers will make the victim believe that, hey, the trafficker's not doing anything wrong, but you, the victim, you're doing everything wrong. So if you don't comply with what the trafficker is telling you, then the trafficker says, we're going to call the police on you and put you in jail. So we're looking at those elements along with other things. And it's kind of like everything coming together, a total package when we're looking at human trafficking, instead of just looking at one thing or another, because then we can get into a slippery slope of accusing somebody of human trafficking when really what it just was solicitation for prostitution or something along those lines.
So let me ask this question. And I know this may seem like a dumb question, but I'm having some problem understanding the difference between a pimp and a prostitute and a trafficker and a victim, because I mean, under most circumstances that I'm aware, when there is a prostitute who's being sexually exploited, and she has to turn her funds over to this other person who sometimes still creates that I'll pay, you have to live in this certain place, isolate them from their family. You can't go places, you can't do any other things. So I guess I'm just having some trouble differentiating those two.
Yeah, and there's another question here too in my watch party is like that kidnapping and forced labor. Is that kidnapping and forced labor? So kind of if you can kind of sift through that a little bit without getting too lawyery.
I'll try my best. Let me start with the caveat of every state's laws are different. Every state has different laws as it relates to kidnapping, prostitution, and human trafficking. Okay. I cannot speak on any state outside of the state of Florida or the District of Columbia. So whatever state you're in, if it's Alabama, Louisiana, wherever, I cannot help you on that. I can't speak on that. I'm not licensed in those states. I'm only licensed in Florida and DC. But when we're talking about prostitution, typically, okay, prostitutes are out on the streets. They know what they're doing. They're doing it intentionally. Okay. When we're talking about individuals who are on the street selling their bodies for human trafficking purposes, they're not doing it willingly. Okay. Sometimes it can start as willing behavior and then turn into human trafficking. In other words, she started off wanting to be a prostitute, but then she decided, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to leave him. And then the force, the threats, the coercion start. With the typical pimp in prostitution, from what I have seen just in my work as a prosecutor, I was going to say as a prostitute, that is not correct. I have never been a prostitute. In my work as a prosecutor, what I typically saw was the pimp had the prostitute wanted to work for the pimp. There was not that force or coercion. They just both knew what they were doing and they knew it was wrong. Okay. With human trafficking, you have that force, you have that coercion, you have that fraud. That's where the major difference comes in Florida.
Okay.
And I try to answer without getting too lawyerly.
Yeah. Well, what about so kidnapping and forced labor, where we'll see. So kids then working for again, we're not making generalizations, but we'll see kids that are selling candies on the street or or when they have the little card and they're asking, oh, you can donate, we're raising money to go on this trip, and you can send it via Cash App, versus, okay, where's the legitimate school, where's all of these things? Because like I said, I actually went to a presentation, listened to that, and just recalled an encounter I had with a group of kids. And I was like, oh, wow, they were probably in a trafficking situation, because it was like, you can Cash App this number, and it's like, is that a real foundation? Like, like, is that a real organization?
And that's where Google becomes our friend, right?
Yes.
Looking it up. Is that real? And again, we don't want to generalize, because a lot of the times, and all three of us have seen this in our sorority, where there will be an activity where some of the kids will be involved, and we have to Cash App or use PayPal to send money to donate to that particular event or something along those lines, or donate to sponsor that kid in this activity or that activity. So again, we don't want to generalize it just because Cash App or PayPal is being used that there's human trafficking activity going on. But again, we have to utilize our resources. We want to look at all of it. Did I go on Google to see real quick? And I mean, it takes 5 seconds to Google something to see if it's real or not. Did I go on Google to see if this is a real organization? Where is your mother or father? Is a question that I think you can ask. Where's mom? Where's dad? Because when we see children, for instance, standing outside of the grocery store selling Girl Scout cookies, or even the Boy Scouts doing things, selling things or having a fundraiser, we typically see parents with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there are times when kids in the neighborhood will knock on the door selling something for football, cheerleading, or school, and we don't see parents with them because they're right here in the neighborhood. And we don't want to generalize and say, okay, because the child is alone, he or she might be, collecting funds as part of a human trafficking ring. We don't want to do that. We want to ask, what organization are you doing this for? Where's mom and dad? Where's mom? Or where's dad? We want to ask questions, but again, we don't want to probe a child too much either, because we don't want to be that person that the child runs back to mommy and daddy, and then the mom or dad runs down to your house yelling at you. But at the same time, we do want to ask questions, because we don't want to overgeneralize either.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the key thing. It's like, when that little voice that speaks to us, sometimes it's telling us that something is wrong. Those hairs stand up on the back of our neck for a reason. And that's a good time to ask questions. But oftentimes, like we said, this is a silent crime, because we don't want to, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to, raise the ire of anyone, or, I'm just busy. And it's like, so you feel that feeling, but you're like, I don't have time for this right now. So I'm not even gonna, Google or ask 1 or 2 probing questions. Usually if you ask 1 or 2 probing questions, the shift in body language will tell you so much about what's going on with someone. And I saw that with those kids. That's why I really think something was happening there, because I was like, well, I did ask them why they were out there. And I was like, well, who's with you? Because the restaurant that they were in front of had already come out and said, hey, we really don't want you out here. Oh. But they were alone. There was no one like within a stone's throw that could pick them up. And it's like, so why do they have you out here in front of this restaurant, and these people have already asked you to leave?
There are, and I'm glad you said that, because there are also a lot of myths as it relates to human trafficking, a whole lot of myths. One of the myths, and I'll just go through all of them. One of them is that all victims are criminals. The victims are led to believe that they're engaging in criminal activity, but they're not all criminals. And it doesn't always start out with them, in prostitution or any other type of criminal activity. It can, like I described before, it can start off with them at a bar or at a restaurant or a club, and they're preyed upon by somebody who looks good and talks a good game and is like, hey, I want to date you, or I want you to come hang out with me so I can talk to you about a better job. The second is that all prostitutes are willing participants. Again, not true. As we talked about earlier, it can start off as prostitution, and then she might want to leave the game of prostitution, and he might start the force or the coercion. Some people also think that human trafficking is a violent crime, that it's always a violent crime. Not always. There may not be threats of killing someone, but there may be other types of threats. There's also a myth that all trafficking or human trafficking involves commercial sex. We talked about that with the labor aspect of it. There's also a myth that only women and girls can be victims. I don't know if you saw any boys or young men out there that evening.
It was 3 young men. It was 3 young men.
It's not just women and girls. It's boys. It's grown men. There's also some belief that victims have to be transported across state or country lines. That's not true. Like I said earlier, some of these victims are in our own backyards and we don't even know it, unfortunately. Another myth is that consent negates human trafficking. Consent's not always relevant. It depends on your state. Again, go by your state laws, but consent should be irrelevant. Most times consent is given under duress, okay, because you're being threatened. There's also a myth that these smooth operators or these traffickers target victims that they don't know. Sometimes it's people they know. Sometimes it's family members. You never know. You never know. Anyone they feel is good prey, that's who they're going after.
Yeah, and we read in news stories about even parents selling their own children, you know, into prostitution or into being the help, you know, being someone's living maid, indentured servant.
Yep.
And we're just talking about in this country, but you know, when you expand it out globally, you know, the exploitation of people it's a $1 billion industry. It's a $1 billion business. And so what data do you have on like, if you could just speak to Florida, because you got to see some of these cases come across your, you know, across your desk. But I just think about, as I drove through the back roads of Florida, you know, down 192, down 90, and 7292, and in some of the more rural areas where there's still orange groves and there's still the little, what appear are like row houses, where people live and work. And it got me thinking about, wow, who are supporting all of this farming activity and the profit for the farming activity, right? Because some people are in traffic situations. As I described earlier with our grandfather, right? That it's a business, and that's what's also scary. It's a business.
I can't speak on the farming aspect of it because based on what I do know about the farming in the state of Florida, I just don't think a lot of human trafficking is coming out of that. So I can't speak there, and I could be very wrong, and I don't want to misspeak. But as it relates to Florida, the data from 2018, there were 896 calls about human trafficking and 367 cases reported in 2018. And 288 of those calls, thankfully, were from victims who were speaking up. In the United States, there were about between 800,000 and 900,000 human trafficking victims per year as of 2018. And there were about 18 to 20,000 victims trafficked into the United States alone per year around that time. And more than half of the victims that have been trafficked into the United States per year are thought to be children. I haven't found any solid data on that, but more than half of the victims trafficked into the US are thought to be children. But again, adult victims are equally men and women, and we have to keep that in mind. And victims have come from all over the world. It's because everyone is fair game to traffickers, to these smooth operators. Everyone is fair game. None of us are exempt from their game. They prey on citizens and non-citizens. The other thing to keep in mind is that human trafficking, a lot of the cases that I have dealt with and read about, even cases that I haven't dealt with but have read about, it's not in the backwoods of our states. It's right in the middle of the city. There was a case that started, you know, with an individual who literally would go to nightclubs to pick up his victims, or to prey on women, to prey on his victims. And, you know, he would sell them that good dream of dating them and wanting to marry them and giving them a lavish lifestyle in the downtown area of that city, which turns out he just wanted to traffic them. Again, it's everywhere. It's not just in the backwoods. It's in the middle, the heart of our cities. It's everywhere in our own backyards.
Yeah, so while you were talking, I went to the humantraffickinghotline.org. So if you go to humantraffickinghotline.org, and I dropped it in the comments, so hopefully it picks up in the comment section. They have a page on the statistics, so you can see by your state. They also have the different types of trafficking, and you know, the top 3 states, 2 of them I have lived in. So California, Texas, and Florida. I currently reside in one of those. But they also break it down by the type of trafficking, the types of the industries: domestic worker, agricultural, traveling sales crews, restaurant, food service, illicit activities. They also then have the top venues. And you know, my sister and I are from Louisiana. New Orleans is one of our favorite cities, and I live here in Orlando. And the hotel and motel industry is basic, you know, a number one occupation. But there's some people who are working in those industries who are in trafficking situations.
And remember, that's where they live also. That is sometimes where the trafficker and the victim will live. They will live in hotel rooms. They will not have a solid home like we would, or an apartment. They literally will live in hotels, and they will go from hotel to hotel to hotel to try to keep themselves, to try to prevent from being caught.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sister, what questions do you have?
Well, I was going to just say that I know, living here in Arizona, that I recently saw, like I think I stated earlier, in a restaurant's bathroom, it was signage for those who may be victims of human trafficking and how they could contact the staff of that particular restaurant to let them know in an inconspicuous way. So that was interesting to me to see that signage in the women's bathroom. That said, I just, you know, if somebody is happens to be watching, they're in the midst of this, something like this, what advice would you give them? What should they do first?
They should know that, and this is the advice that I would give any of us if we were to come into contact with a victim of human trafficking as well. They should know that we're here to help them. They should know that their safety is our priority. They should know that if they cooperate, they will not be hurt. Because remember, the smooth operator or the trafficker has already ingrained in their minds that they will be hurt if they try to seek help or if they cooperate. They need to understand that they will get the social services that they need, because they're sometimes afraid to leave that lifestyle as well, because they don't feel like they will have any money to get back on their feet, or they won't have anywhere to go. They need to understand that whomever they go to will help find them a safe place to be, a place that is safe for them to live, that they will get the help that they need, that we all want to make sure, right, that they don't hurt anyone, that the smooth operator or the trafficker, that they don't hurt anyone else, and that there are people who can help them get out of this situation, and that it is possible to rebuild your life. You just have to talk to someone. Let someone know that this is happening to you. And again, if any of us come into contact with someone that is the victim of human trafficking, these are the same things that we need to let them know. We need to let them know that we're here to help, and that we will help get them the help that they need. And obviously we can't do it alone, but we will help. We will go get the resources that are necessary.
Yeah. And there are many resources out there. So definitely, I've dropped it in the comments, humantraffickinghotline.org. They have resources there. They talk about planning, a more defining. They have some of those myths and facts, some of the things that we have discussed tonight. I remember a few years ago, we visited in Cincinnati, the slavery, which museum was that? Oh my gosh, civil rights slavery, whatever museum. Anyway, you could look across the Kentucky and debate between the Kentucky and Ohio. That was the distance to freedom, right across the river. But as we walked through that exhibit and learned about the history of slavery, one floor is dedicated to modern day slavery, which is human trafficking. It's considered modern day slavery. And as we said, it's happening right under our noses often, and we're not even aware. So Valencia, if you would tell people about some of the resources here locally that you are aware of in the state of Florida.
The first number you should always call is 911. 911. Okay. First number you should always call is 911. By working with law enforcement agencies, you can obviously get the help that you need legally, as well as through the victim advocate services that the state has. The other number would be the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. I don't believe that's the same number that you put up earlier, but that number is 1-888-373-7888. If you, and we talked about generalizing a lot. So if you come into contact with someone whom you think might be the victim of human trafficking, this is the hotline to use if you're unsure. If you need a little more help on trying to figure it out, this is the hotline to call. They will help you determine if you have encountered a victim of human trafficking. They'll also help you identify local resources. So if you're not in Florida, if you're in Louisiana, Alabama, wherever, they'll help you locate or identify rather local resources and coordinate protection for victims as well. So again, that number is 1-888-373-7888. But the first number you should always call is 911 because, again, there are victim advocates ready to help victims of human trafficking.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight for this very important topic. Thank you for hanging in with the technological challenges. Work on getting some of that corrected. And for those of you who are out watching, we want to thank you for sticking with us. So many of you have stuck with us throughout, and we really sincerely appreciate you hanging in there as we work through some of the technological challenges. And for those of you who are watching this and like, what technological challenges are they talking about? Don't worry about it. You didn't see it. So with that being said, we're getting ready to sign off tonight. As always, we ask that you like, follow, share. Hey, sister, share this conversation. If you have children that you want to have a conversation with about what they should be looking for among their peer group, at school, with some of their friends, if they have any concerns or they come to you with something, go back, listen to this. If you have older children, you certainly can sit and listen to this with some of those older children. If you have friends or family members who you're concerned, it looks like they're living on the margins of society. Many who are exploited are also in the LGBTQ community. So look for everything and use this as a tool to kind of start having those conversations that we often avoid having because we're not sure. We just don't want to get involved. We may not want to rock the boat, but this is a growing problem in our society, and we want to do everything within our power to stem it and ultimately put an end to it.
Absolutely.
And with that being said, sister, you have a closing remark for the people?
I think my closing remark is, as always, if you see something, say something. I mean, you don't have to be the corner store Caroline or the barbecue Becky. Don't just call the police on folks for no reasons. But if you see something and in your gut, I mean, that's why we have intuition. If you feel like something may not be right, if you see something, say something and take the steps. If it turns out to be nothing, no harm, no foul. But if it is something, then you may save somebody's life.
Yes. And go to these hotlines. Talk through, make sure before you make that call and read those fact sheets and all of that information out there. Share it with those you love. Share it with your children's schools as well, because it's important that we spread this message for and why. Valencia, any closing remarks?
Just again, I think what Sister said was best. If you see something, look into it. I mean, but again, put your safety at the forefront. Don't try to play Inspector Gadget and get yourself hurt trying to investigate a situation. Remember, we have law enforcement for a reason. I know there are some issues out there, but the reality is law enforcement officers are our friends. They're here to help us. It's okay to call them if you feel like you've seen something that sparks your attention as it relates to this topic.
Okay. Well, with that being said, Valencia, Christina, hold the line, and everyone else, we thank you for tuning in tonight's episode of Hey Sister. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.